It was late October of 1998, in the quiet town of Larksville, North Carolina, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and knew every neighbor by name. The air smelled faintly of rain and pine that evening, the streets slick beneath the fading glow of streetlights. In a town this small, silence had a rhythm of its own, broken only by the sound of crickets and the occasional truck rolling down Main Street. But that night, something interrupted the rhythm, something that would echo through this community for decades. Her name was Emily Carter, 24 years old, a recent college graduate who had just started her job as a teacher's aide at the local elementary school. She had a gentle way about her, the kind of person who remembered birthdays, who'd stop to help stray dogs, who left notes of encouragement on her friends' windshields. Her smile was the kind that softened people's moods, and she was loved for it. On the evening of October 22nd, Emily left the school just after 6:30 p.m. She told her friend and co-worker, Laura Jennings, that she'd stop by the grocery store before heading home. Laura remembered that Emily seemed tired but cheerful, talking about grading papers and how she couldn't wait for the weekend to visit her parents. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. By the next morning, when Emily didn't show up for work, concern turned to worry. Calls went unanswered, her apartment was empty, and her car, a blue 1994 Honda Civic, was nowhere to be found. Her mother, Margaret Carter, said she knew something was wrong the moment the phone rang and the police were on the other end. Emily was responsible, she told reporters years later. If she was going to be late, she called, always. The first sign of trouble came 2 days later, when Emily's car was discovered abandoned on a rural back road just 5 miles outside of town. The keys were still in the ignition. Her purse was on the passenger seat, and inside it, her wallet, ID, and the grocery list she'd written the night she vanished. But there was something else. The driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, too far for Emily, who was barely 5'3", to have driven comfortably. The discovery drew dozens of officers, deputies, and volunteers. They combed through the woods, the nearby creek, even the abandoned barns that dotted the countryside. For a week, it felt like the whole county was searching for Emily Carter. Helicopters buzzed overhead, news crews swarmed the small town, and candlelight vigils were held outside the school where she worked. But as days turned into weeks, the hope that she'd come home safe began to fade. Then, on November 3rd, a local hunter stumbled upon something deep in the forest, a red scarf tangled in the brush. Emily's mother confirmed it was hers. The search intensified again, but no further trace of her was found. The case quickly turned from a missing person report into a suspected abduction, and fear gripped the community like never before. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, co-workers, old boyfriends, anyone who'd had contact with Emily in the days before she disappeared. There were rumors, whispers that a strange man had been seen near the school parking lot that week. One neighbor claimed she saw a dark pickup truck following Emily's car on the night she vanished. But none of it led to anything solid. Investigators followed the few leads they had. One of the first suspects was Tom Reeves, a maintenance worker at the school who'd once asked Emily out. He was older, divorced, and had a reputation for drinking too much. Police questioned him for hours, searched his home, even collected samples from his truck. But the tests came back clean. He had an alibi, and the trail went cold again. Weeks turned into months. The winter came, and with it silence. Emily's family kept calling the sheriff's office, asking for updates, clinging to hope. Margaret would visit the edge of the woods every few days, leaving flowers and handwritten notes tied to tree branches. Her father, Robert Carter, spent evenings driving the back roads, headlights cutting through the dark, as if he might suddenly find her standing there. In February 1999, almost 4 months after Emily vanished, a group of hikers found human remains in a wooded area just 15 miles from where her car had been discovered. The medical examiner confirmed it. They were Emily's. Her body was partially buried near a creek bed. The autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head and signs of a struggle. She had fought back. The discovery shattered whatever hope the town had been holding on to. Larksville wasn't the kind of place where young women were killed, especially not someone like Emily Carter. At her funeral, the church overflowed. Students she'd helped read for the first time left handwritten notes on her casket. Friends spoke through tears about her kindness, her laugh, and how unfair it all felt. Detectives redoubled their efforts, but they were running out of leads. DNA was collected from under Emily's fingernails and from fibers found on her clothing. But in 1999, forensic technology was limited. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the national database, but there were no matches. It was like the killer had vanished into thin air. Over the next year, tips dwindled. The case file grew thicker, filled with dead ends and unanswered questions. The sheriff at the time, Jim Holden, said years later, "We had everything but the face. We knew she'd fought her attacker. We had his DNA, but without a name we had nothing." For Emily's family, life never truly returned to normal. Her parents eventually moved to Raleigh, unable to drive past the school or the road where her car had been found. Her younger brother, Daniel, grew up haunted by the loss. He joined law enforcement years later, in part to make sense of what had happened to his sister. Still, each October, someone would leave fresh flowers near that lonely stretch of road. Sometimes it was her mother, sometimes strangers who'd never met Emily. Her story lingered on local news reruns, in the quiet memories of her students, and in the unsolved case files gathering dust in the sheriff's office. By the time 2 decades had passed, Emily's case had become one of North Carolina's longest-running unsolved murders. Detectives came and went, leads appeared and disappeared, and the evidence box, labeled Carter Emily 1998, sat untouched on a metal shelf in the evidence room. But time, as it turned out, was not on the killer's side, because by 2025, something would happen that no one in Larksville could have imagined. Detective Alan Reeves had been on the force for less than 5 years when Emily Carter's case first landed on his desk. Back then he was young, ambitious, and believed that every mystery had an answer, that if you worked hard enough, justice always came through. But as weeks turned into months and leads into dead ends, even that belief began to crack. He remembered the first time he walked through the woods where Emily's body had been found. The air was heavy with damp earth and pine. Her grave wasn't deep. Whoever had done it was in a hurry. He'd stood there staring down at the soft mound of dirt and said quietly to himself, "Who could do this?" The question would follow him for decades. In the months after the discovery, the sheriff's department poured nearly all its resources into the investigation. There were sketches of possible suspects, composite drawings based on fleeting witness statements, a dark truck, a tall man in a baseball cap, someone who looked out of place at the gas station that night. But the descriptions changed from person to person. Forensics had collected hair fibers, soil samples, and DNA from the crime scene. But in 1999, DNA testing was slow, expensive, and far less precise than it is today. The lab results came back months later, showing an unidentified male profile, not in any database. No match. Emily's friends were interviewed repeatedly. Her ex-boyfriend, Brian Hale, was questioned 3 times. He was heartbroken but cooperative. Police looked into her co-workers, her landlord, even delivery drivers who worked near the school. Every lead fizzled. And then there was Jason Lutz, a local mechanic with a short temper and a record for domestic disputes. He'd been seen in the area the night Emily disappeared. Officers brought him in twice for questioning. He denied knowing her, claimed he'd never even been to that side of town. His alibi was weak, but when his DNA didn't match, he was let go. By the summer of 1999, the investigation had lost momentum. Media attention faded, and the sheriff's department had newer cases piling up. The Carters still called every week. Margaret, Emily's mother, kept a notebook filled with every officer's name, badge number, and date of conversation. She refused to let the case be forgotten. "She's still my daughter," she would tell anyone who'd listen. "She still matters." In 2000, Sheriff Holden ordered a case review. He hoped fresh eyes might see what they'd missed. Dozens of reports were re-examined, photos reprinted, and interviews reread. Still nothing. The DNA remained their best hope, but without a match it was a dead end. Years passed. Alan Reeves was promoted to lead detective. He married, had kids, and grew older, but Emily's file stayed on his desk. He couldn't bring himself to close it. Every few years he'd pull it out, spread the photos across his desk, Emily smiling with her students, the car in the woods, the scarf, and he'd stare at them, searching for something new. In 2009, when North Carolina upgraded its DNA database, Reeves resubmitted the evidence for retesting. Technology had advanced, faster, more accurate, capable of finding partial matches. When the results came back, his heart pounded as he opened the report. But it wasn't a match. The sample was clean, the data solid, but the profile still belonged to no one in the system. That year, Reeves drove out to see Margaret Carter. She was older now, her hair silver, her voice thinner but steady. They sat on her porch drinking sweet tea, the afternoon cicadas buzzing in the background. "You'll find him, won't you?" she asked. Reeves hesitated before answering. "We won't stop trying, ma'am." He meant it. As the years rolled by, the case became something like a ghost story in Larksville. Kids whispered about it when they passed the old road at night. Locals swore the woods were haunted. And every new detective who joined the department heard the same warning. Don't let Emily Carter's case make you lose sleep. But Reeves never stopped thinking about it. In 2017, advances in genealogical DNA testing, where investigators could identify suspects through relatives who had uploaded their genetic profiles to public databases, were changing cold case investigations across the country. Reeves began pushing for the Carter evidence to be tested again using this new technology. But the process was expensive, and smaller counties like Larksville didn't have the funds. It took another 6 years before the state finally offered assistance. By then, Reeves was nearing retirement. His hair was gray, his hands unsteady. But when he got the call from the state forensic lab in Raleigh asking if he wanted Emily's sample included in a pilot program, he didn't hesitate. "Do it," he said. "It's about damn time." The new analysis was sent off in April of 2024. Reeves didn't expect much. After all these years, hope had become something he kept locked away. Too painful to hold on to, too cruel to let go of. But one morning, 8 months later, he got the call that would change everything. It was a match, not a direct one, a familial match. The DNA from Emily's fingernails matched partially to a man already in the system and a man who'd been arrested for assault in South Carolina in 2019. That meant the suspect in Emily's case was likely a relative. For Reeves, it was the first real break in 26 years. The lab traced the genetic links through ancestry data, narrowing the family tree down to a single line. It led them to a man named Michael Turner, who had once lived in Larksville in the late 1990s, before moving to Tennessee. At the time of Emily's disappearance, he'd been 29 years old, working as a delivery driver. Reeves remembered the name. Turner had been briefly questioned back in 1999, one of dozens of locals interviewed. He'd said he didn't know Emily, and had nothing to do with her disappearance. His record was clean back then, and police had let him go. Now, 2 decades later, his DNA, through a close relative, was pointing straight back at him. Reeves sat in silence at his desk, staring at the name on the report. After all these years, all the sleepless nights and dead ends, it came down to this. One man hiding in plain sight, carrying a secret he thought he'd buried with her. The next step was clear. A warrant was issued for a direct DNA sample, Detectives coordinated with Tennessee authorities, who collected a fresh sample from Turner in January 2025. 2 weeks later, the results came back. A perfect match to the unknown male DNA from the 1998 crime scene. Michael Turner had been living an ordinary life. Married, 2 children, a steady job at an auto shop. No one who knew him suspected a thing. When officers arrived at his home in Nashville that morning to make the arrest, neighbors stood on their porches in shock. One woman told reporters, "He used to fix my car. I just can't believe it. He was so polite." Inside the Larksville Sheriff's Office, Detective Reeves got the call he'd been waiting for since he was 32 years old. "We got him," the voice said. Reeves sat back in his chair, his eyes burning. For a long time, he didn't say a word. 27 years after Emily Carter was taken from her family, the man responsible was finally in custody, but the arrest was just the beginning. The truth, and the confession that would come next, would reveal a story darker than anyone imagined. When Michael Turner was brought back to North Carolina, it was raining, the same kind of steady, cold drizzle that had fallen the night Emily disappeared. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse in Larksville, cameras flashing as deputies led him inside in handcuffs. He kept his head down, saying nothing, his once dark hair now streaked with gray. Detective Alan Reeves stood just beyond the cameras, watching. After 27 years, he was finally face to face with the man who had haunted his every sleepless night. But there was no satisfaction in it, only a deep, quiet ache. Inside the interrogation room, Turner sat across from Reeves. The detective placed a thick folder on the table. The Carter file, worn from decades of handling, its edges curled and soft. For a moment, neither man spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the silence. Reeves started calmly. "You know why you're here, Michael." Turner's eyes flicked up briefly. "You think I killed that girl?" His voice was low, flat. Reeves leaned forward. "I don't think it anymore. I know it." He slid a document across the table, the DNA match confirmation. Turner stared at it but didn't reach for it. His jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean anything," he muttered. "It means everything," Reeves said softly. "That's your DNA under her fingernails. She fought you, Michael. You couldn't hide that." Turner looked away, his fingers trembling slightly as he rubbed his palms together. Minutes passed. Then, finally, he whispered, "It wasn't supposed to happen." It was the first crack in 27 years of silence. Turner's voice was barely audible as he began to talk. He said he'd known Emily casually from the diner where she worked part-time. He'd stop in for coffee, they'd talk sometimes. She was friendly, warm, the kind of person who made you feel seen. He admitted he'd asked her out once, and she'd politely turned him down. He said that night in March 1998, he saw her walking home in the rain and offered her a ride. She refused, but he followed anyway. When she reached the edge of the woods, she slipped, startled, and he grabbed her arm. Things escalated fast. He said he lost control. Reeves listened in silence as Turner described what happened. The struggle, her screams, the moment he realized she wasn't breathing. "I panicked," Turner said. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to stop screaming." He buried her there in the shallow grave they'd found and drove home covered in mud. No one ever asked where he'd been. No one suspected a thing. When he finished speaking, he sat back, pale and shaking. Reeves closed the folder and stood up slowly. "You had 27 years to tell the truth," he said quietly. "You could have given her family peace a long time ago." Turner didn't respond. Later that afternoon, the sheriff's office held a press conference. Reporters packed the small briefing room, the air thick with anticipation. Sheriff Klein stood at the podium, flanked by Reeves and representatives from the state forensic lab. "After nearly 3 decades," he said, "we can finally say the name of the man responsible for taking Emily Carter's life. Michael James Turner, now 56, has been charged with first-degree murder. For Margaret and Richard Carter, the news came as both a relief and a breaking point. They had waited 27 years to hear those words. Margaret wept openly when she saw Turner's face on the evening news. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man who took her." Neighbors dropped by the Carter home with food, flowers, and quiet condolences. Some of them had been in their 20s back when Emily disappeared. Now they were grandparents. The case had lived in the background of the town's consciousness for so long that it almost felt like an old wound reopening. At the diner where Emily once worked, someone left a bouquet of daisies at the counter with a note that read, "For Emily, never forgotten." The next morning, the restaurant owner framed the note and placed it near the register. In the weeks leading up to the trial, details from the case dominated local news. Reporters revisited the original investigation, interviewing retired officers and witnesses. Many expressed guilt that the truth had been right there all along. Reeves gave one brief interview saying only, "It wasn't technology that solved this case, Gowdy, it was persistence." When the trial began in May 2025, the courtroom was packed. Margaret Carter sat in the front row every day, clutching a locket that held a picture of Emily smiling in her graduation gown. Turner sat a few feet away, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit, staring straight ahead. The prosecution's case was airtight. DNA evidence, Turner's recorded confession, and testimony from forensic experts painted a clear picture. They showed how new genealogical technology had connected Turner's family DNA to the scene, leading investigators straight to him. Reeves took the stand, his voice steady but heavy with emotion, as he recounted years of false starts and quiet determination. "We never gave up," he said. "Not once." The defense tried to argue that Turner's confession was coerced, that he was mentally exhausted, but the jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too strong. Margaret Carter testified on the final day of the trial. Her voice wavered, but her words carried through the silent courtroom. "For 27 years I've prayed for this day. I've prayed for answers. And now that I have them, I just want my daughter to rest." After only 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Turner showed no emotion as the judge read the sentence: life in prison without parole. When the verdict was announced, Margaret reached for Reeves's hand. He squeezed it gently, both of them fighting back tears. Outside, as news cameras rolled, Margaret spoke softly to the reporters gathered on her lawn. "It doesn't bring her back," she said, "but it brings her peace. And that's something." The community of Larksville held a candlelight vigil that night in front of the old courthouse. Hundreds attended: families, neighbors, former classmates, even retired officers who had worked the case in the late 90s. The soft glow of candles lit up the courthouse steps as the crowd sang "Amazing Grace." Reeves stood in the back, watching. He didn't join in the song, he just listened. The sound of it carried through the night, gentle and strong, rising above the rustle of the trees. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, he felt something close to peace. The Carter case had defined his career, shaped his life. Now, as he prepared to retire later that year, he knew that the story would stay with him forever. Not because of the horror of what happened, but because of the strength of the people who refused to give up. Emily's name, once a symbol of loss, had become a symbol of endurance. When the arrest was finally made in 2025, it felt almost surreal for those who had lived with the shadow of the case for nearly 3 decades. The name that surfaced, Thomas. Tommy Rayfield, was one many in Fayetteville remembered, though not for anything remarkable. He'd been a quiet mechanic, living on the outskirts of town, a man who fixed people's cars, waved politely at neighbors, and never drew attention. Yet, behind that unassuming life, detectives discovered the dark secret that had stolen a young woman's future all those years ago. The evidence that finally led to him came from a preserved blood sample found on the back seat of Carla Jennings' old Ford Escort. For years, it had been carefully sealed in evidence storage, too degraded for earlier testing. But new DNA enhancement techniques developed in the late 2010s made it possible to isolate the foreign profile. When entered into the federal database, the sample triggered a cold hit, an exact match to Rayfield, whose DNA had been collected in 2023 following a misdemeanor assault charge. Detectives described the moment the match came through as electric. After decades of dead ends, a name appeared where there had only been silence. Within hours, the case file was reopened, and the long-forgotten photos, transcripts, and maps were spread once again across an evidence table. Detective Sergeant Laura Daniels, who had joined the department in 2001 and spent most of her career haunted by the Jennings case, said it felt like a ghost whispering in her ear, "You can finish this now." The decision to move on Rayfield was handled carefully. He was 62 by then, still living in Cumberland County, working part-time at a tire shop and renting a small trailer off Bragg Boulevard. Surveillance teams observed him for several days before the arrest. They watched him buy groceries, stop by the hardware store, and sit quietly on his porch in the evenings drinking beer and listening to old country radio. Nothing about him screamed murderer, but the DNA didn't lie. When the warrant was served, Rayfield didn't resist. Officers described him as calm, even cooperative, as though he had been expecting this moment for a long time. "Guess it finally caught up," he reportedly said when handcuffed. That single line sent chills through the room. At the station,